You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to learn more about the Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com, where we have past podcasts, blogs, and a couple items for sale. So check us out, beardedtheologians.com. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this week's show. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
So this week on the podcast, we're gonna, as we've been making our way through Genesis, it's kind of hard to jump from story to story, and I mean, there's so much in the book of Genesis. It's a very rich book of the Bible to read, and I would encourage you to like literally sit down and read through it. It's a great read. It also helps really kind of understand a lot of what happens in the Hebrew Bible, but also in the New Testament as well. And so with that in mind, as we were kind of jumping around, we're literally jumping around hitting spots. We've kind of wanted to spend about 6 weeks in Genesis. And so we recognize that we can't just like go, like it's kind of hard just to go through it. And so we were just kind of picking stories, and we're picking one that is near and dear, a little bit too close to home for me. We're going to look at Jacob wrestling with God, found in Genesis 32, and I'll let Zach kind of give the full verses there.
Yeah, certainly. So there's a lot that leads into this story from Jacob. There's just a lot. Jacob and Esau are brothers, and they have a pretty rich history and vibrant story. As Matt said, but we're going to skip over to this one towards the end of Jacob's story, and it's Jacob wrestling with God. He's got a couple of wives and a whole bunch of servants and kids and people, and they're doing the thing that early Hebrew people do, and just being nomadic and trying to find a place to be, and so they get up and go or Jacob sends them along essentially in the middle of the night, and he stays by himself. So we pick up in verse 24. But Jacob stayed apart by himself, and a man wrestled with him until dawn broke. When the man saw that he couldn't defeat Jacob, he grabbed Jacob's thigh and tore a muscle in Jacob's thigh as he wrestled with him. The man said, "Let me go, because dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I won't let you go until you bless me." He said to Jacob, "What's your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, your name won't be Jacob any longer, but Israel, because you struggled with God and with men and won. Jacob also asked and said, "Tell me your name." But he said, "Why do you ask for my name?" And he blessed Jacob there. Jacob named the place Peniel, because I've seen God face to face, and my life has been saved. The sun rose as Jacob passed, limping because of his thigh. Therefore, the Israelites don't eat the tendon attached to the thigh muscle to this day, because he grabbed Jacob's thigh muscle at the tendon. And so Matt, in that quick reading of that story, what sticks out the most to you?
This is why I always carry a chair with me, just in case I have to hit somebody with it. Not really. This is one of those childhood Sunday school stories that gets told.
Mm-hmm.
And
we have coloring sheets for this one too.
Yes. I would hope that with the coloring sheet that there'd be some child, and maybe the next time I see a coloring sheet, I might do this, might give Jacob or God the mask, like a luchadora mask to wrestle, because I think it would just be cool to give one of them, or even both of them. They could both have luchador mask, because that's what kind of comes into mind as I think about the wrestling on this. And then as someone who's had hip issues, knowing that just to get out of it, the God literally just like bam, like that's not fair. That's not cool.
Well, if you just do the things he told you to do, it'd be fine. You wouldn't have two busted hips.
Maybe I'm double blessed.
There you go.
We'll just go with that. This is an interesting story. This is one of those stories, and the book of Genesis is really big on this, as origin stories about naming places and naming people. Right. And so like you get both of those in this story. Jacob's name is changed, and then the place in which he wrestles with God gets the name of Penol, which is, you know, just the name that you'll see that come up. And people like, and that's one of the beautiful things, that if you were listening to this, granted, remember, it'd be an oral tradition, and so it'd be told orally. When you would hear that, you would go back to this story and remember, this is how that got that name. And it's done similar, like in tribal cultures, native tribes do that too. And they'll name places. So that way, when you're telling the story or you're telling where it is, like, you'll know the origin of it. And it's a really great way of storytelling and remembering. And we still even do that today with a lot of things. And so, like, I those two things come to mind: the name change of Jacob, and then the name of the place, and then the wrestling with God. Let's be real: you can never win when you really wrestle with God.
Well, and I think for me, it's that same thing. It's really, there's 3 points in the story that if somebody's asking, you know, if a young child is sitting around with mom and dad, and they could ask, can we wrestle with God? Here's the story, right? Jacob did it, and here's what happens. You know, like you said, what's that place over there, and why is that important? That's where Jacob wrestled with God, right? And then the last one of, why don't we eat this part of the animal, right? Why can't we eat that? Why is this a thing? And that comes out of it because, you know, this is the thing that happened. And you're right, this all comes from oral tradition. It comes from being passed down and telling the stories and trying to understand who they are, why they're there, how they got there, why they do the things they do. And that's all wrapped up in this one little story that's pretty significant about Jacob wrestling with God, and what transpires from that. But I think the thing that grabs my attention the most is, as Jacob is wrestling with this man and not knowing that it's God, he you know, God says, let me go, I've got to leave, you know, dawn is breaking, it's time for me to bounce. And Jacob says, no, not until you bless me. And I think that's fascinating, in the sense of Jacob shows a lot of fortitude or arrogance or something to request a blessing from this person that he doesn't know is God, but he just knows it's somebody he's wrestling with, and he wants his blessing, and he wants it now, which tends to be a theme with Jacob's life, demanding blessings or taking blessings where they're not necessarily his. But I think that's interesting in the commentary of this story of, not, I mean, the wrestling is great, the other stuff is great, but he demands this blessing before he lets him go. I think that's really interesting in the sense of the tradition of that day and time, and even now.
Maybe that when you do a Jacob sermon series, you could be Jacob, demand a blessing.
Yeah.
You know, I think that would be interesting. And, you know, I don't know, this is one of those stories that, you know, is a Sunday school story. And I think this is not one that doesn't get glossed over like some of the ones that we've done so far have. And I think that this is where really diving into the text is important, because you'll see things that you don't normally see. But I think that call for the blessing is one that has been part of Jacob's life and it's part of his character. Sometimes he went about it a little bit more ethically than others, but he definitely wants to have that space and just that kind of remembrance of, and that, you know, I always think when you receive a blessing, you're receiving kind of a, I always like to say a call, but like a just kind of a push and just an anointing of oneself that is sacred, and that's
right.
kind of
And I think that's why it catches my attention, in the sense of, when you receive a blessing, typically it's a humble experience. This is not so much.
Yeah.
This isn't Jacob humbling himself before God, right? And receiving the blessing in return. You know, it's much more violent than that.
Maybe he's a 3 on the Enneagram.
He's definitely a 3 on the Enneagram.
It seems like that's a 3 on the Enneagram scale of things. Just an activity that I'm, yeah.
Right.
So.
I think there's a lot of conversation there that we can have here and beyond in the circles as we listen to this podcast and dig through this text of what does it mean to demand a blessing? What does it mean to wrestle with God, with anything, with something internally, and then demand a response, demand something in return. In what does it take for us to get to that place, right? And is it a healthy place for us to be or not? I think there's a lot of conversation to be had around that.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to land for us today. Is how are you seeking blessing? And you don't necessarily have to demand it, but definitely be aware that it. But I also think the flip side of that too is that you can be a blessing to other people too. And how are you living that out in your life?
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to go to our website at beardedtheologians.com and check out all of our great material and things that we have up there. And it's also getting closer to Pastor Appreciation Month. And so if you want to get your pastor a t-shirt or a coffee mug, feel free to do that. You can check us out at beardedtheologians.com. And so for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
First, guys, I want you to subscribe and like this video and push that thumbs up.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.